The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Jake Thompson's meticulously maintained 5-acre ranch, a sanctuary he'd built with 15 years of hard work and every penny he'd saved from his years as a military contractor. A swimming pool glimmered like a blue jewel nestled between the barn and the main house, a personal oasis he dreamed of for years, and now, inexplicably, a source of neighborhood drama that was about to explode. Jake wiped the sweat from his brow, his muscular frame still bearing the discipline of his years in special operations. He'd seen combat zones more peaceful than the suburban battleground brewing right next door. Karen Weitzman, his 60-something neighbor, had been watching him with an intensity that would make a drill sergeant look casual. It started innocently enough. Jake had just finished installing the pool 6 months ago, completing the last piece of his post-military dream. The ranch was his reward, a quiet place where he could decompress, train his 2 German shepherds, and enjoy some much-needed privacy. He carefully followed every local regulation, obtained all necessary permits, and even consulted with the neighborhood association about the pool's placement and fencing. But Karen saw things differently. From the moment the first shovel of dirt was turned for the pool's construction, she'd been a constant presence. Her white sit-in would mysteriously appear at the most unexpected times, slowly creeping past his property line, her eyes scanning every inch like a hawk searching for prey. Jake had tried being neighborly at first, offering a wave, even bringing over some homemade cookies his sister had sent from Wisconsin. Karen's response? A tight-lipped smile that looked more like a grimace. Today was different. Jake could feel it in the tension that seemed to vibrate through the air. He just finished cleaning the pool, the chlorine smell mixing with the dry Texas grass and distant cattle from neighboring ranches. His dogs, Max and Duke, lay panting near the pool's edge, tongues lolling out in the late afternoon heat. He noticed Karen's curtain switching again, that same nervous, almost obsessive movement he'd come to recognize over the past months. Something was brewing, and Jake's military-trained instincts were on high alert. Little did he know that within the next few hours, a simple afternoon by his own pool would transform into a nightmare of bureaucratic proportions. Karen wasn't just watching, she was planning. And her weapon of choice wasn't going to be a neighborly conversation, but something far more official. A phone call that would bring multiple official vehicles racing down his quiet country road. Jake took a long drink of water, completely unaware that his peaceful ranch was about to become ground zero for a suburban conflict that would challenge everything he thought he knew about property rights, neighborly conduct, and the unwritten rules of rural living. The first hint of trouble came with the distant sound of a phone being dialed, a sound that would echo far louder than Karen could have ever imagined. The first official vehicle arrived precisely 17 minutes after Karen's phone call. Jake was still toweling off from his swim when he heard the crunch of gravel under official tires. His dogs, trained to be alert but not aggressive, stood at attention near the back porch, their ears pricked forward. A county sheriff's deputy approached, clipboard in hand, looking slightly uncomfortable in the mid-afternoon heat. Jake recognized him, Deputy Mike Ramirez, a local officer he'd spoken with during a community safety meeting last year. Something about the way Ramirez approached suggested this wasn't a routine visit. "Mr. Thompson." The deputy's voice carried a mixture of professional courtesy and underlying tension. Jake stepped forward, still shirtless, droplets of pool water clinging to his military-cut physique. "That's me. What can I do for you, deputy?" The story spilled out in fragments. Karen had called the sheriff's department reporting multiple violations, unauthorized pool use, potential safety hazards, and most bizarrely, claims of suspicious activity around his property. Jake listened, a slow burn of frustration building behind his carefully controlled exterior. "She claims you're running some kind of unauthorized business from the pool," Ramirez explained, flipping through his notes. "Something about strangers coming and going at odd hours." Jake couldn't help but laugh. The absurdity of the accusation was almost overwhelming. His pool had seen exactly 3 guests since he'd installed it. His sister during her brief visit last month, a local veteran buddy who'd helped him with some ranch maintenance, and his physical therapist who occasionally used the pool for rehabilitation exercises. "Those aren't strangers," Deputy Jake explained, walking Ramirez around the property. "Those are friends, family, and medical professionals. Nothing more." But Karen had been thorough. Along with her phone call, she compiled a thick folder of what she considered evidence. Blurry smartphone photos taken from her property line, notes detailing every vehicle that had ever entered Jake's ranch, and a hand-drawn map showing supposed suspicious zones around the pool. The truly ironic part, Jake was a decorated veteran who had spent years protecting the very freedoms Karen was now attempting to restrict. He'd served multiple tours, earned commendations for valor, and now found himself defending his right to use his own private property against the watchful eyes of a suburban vigilant. Deputy Ramirez seemed increasingly uncomfortable. Jake could read people. It was a skill honed through years of military intelligence work. The deputy didn't believe Karen's claims, but protocol demanded he investigate every complaint. "Look," Ramirez finally said, closing his notebook, "everything seems to be in order. All your permits are current, the pool meets all safety regulations, and there's nothing remotely suspicious happening here." But Jake knew this was far from over. Karen wasn't the type to back down easily. The phone call to the sheriff's department was just the opening salvo in what promised to be a protracted suburban warfare. As the deputy's vehicle disappeared down the long gravel drive, Jake's dogs looked up at him, almost human in their expression of shared disbelief. Max gave a low, sardonic bark, a sound that seemed to say, "Here we go again." Little did Jake know, Karen was already planning her next move. The next morning brought an unexpected twist to Jake's already complicated situation. As he prepared his morning coffee, the distinctive sound of a drone buzzed overhead. At first, he thought it might be a local agricultural survey or perhaps a hobbyist photographer. But the precision of its movements told a different story. Jake stepped onto his back porch, coffee mug in hand, and watched as the drone hovered deliberately over his pool area. There was no mistaking its intent, surveillance pure and simple, and he knew exactly who was behind it. Karen Weitzman had escalated her campaign. His phone rang moments later. The caller ID showed the local zoning office, a number he'd become unexpectedly familiar with in recent weeks. Sarah Martinez, a long-suffering bureaucrat Jake had spoken with multiple times, sounded tired before she even began speaking. "Mr. Thompson," she began, "we've received another complaint about your property." Jake listened as Sarah detailed a series of alleged infractions. Apparently, Karen had compiled a comprehensive dossier claiming that Jake's pool violated multiple zoning regulations. Never mind that Jake had meticulously followed every single guideline when installing the pool. Never mind that he'd spent thousands ensuring the installation met, exceeded every local requirement. The irony wasn't lost on him. Jake, a man who had risked his life protecting order and following rules, was now being painted as some kind of neighborhood menace by a retired accountant with too much time on her hands. His military training kicked in. Jake began gathering documentation, permits, inspection reports, architectural plans. He knew the best defense was a comprehensive paper trail. Each document was carefully organized, copied, and filed. If Karen wanted a war of bureaucracy, he would be more than prepared. But Karen was playing a longer game. That afternoon, a local news van appeared at the end of his long driveway. Jake watched, incredulous, as a young reporter with an overeager cameraman tried to position themselves for the perfect shot. Somehow, Karen had managed to spin her narrative to local media, painting Jake as a potential threat to the neighborhood's safety and tranquility. The dogs sensed his rising tension. Max, the older German shepherd, pressed against Jake's leg, a gesture of support learned through years of companionship. Duke, younger and more reactive, let out a low growl directed toward the news van. Jake's phone buzzed. A text from his sister in Wisconsin. "What the hell is going on? I'm seeing something about you on local news." He knew then that this was no longer just a local dispute. Karen had successfully transformed a simple disagreement about pool usage into a public spectacle, and Jake was squarely in the crosshairs. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across his ranch, Jake realized this was going to be a fight unlike any he'd encountered before, not on a battlefield, but in the most unexpected of war zones, his own suburban neighborhood. The drone continued its methodical patrol overhead, a mechanical sentinel in Karen's growing arsenal of harassment. And Jake Thompson, decorated veteran, began to prepare for a battle that would test every ounce of his patience, discipline, and understanding of civil rights. The Homeowners Association meeting became Jake's Alamo, the final stand against Karen's relentless campaign. He arrived precisely at 7 p.m., dressed in pressed khakis and a polo shirt, looking every bit the model citizen. His folder of documentation was thick, organized with military precision. Max and Duke waited in his truck, trained to remain calm despite the tension that seemed to crackle in the air. The community center's meeting room buzzed with nervous energy. Jake counted 17 of his neighbors, most of whom he recognized from years of polite waves and occasional barbecue conversations. Karen sat front and center, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, glasses perched on the end of her nose like a weapon of bureaucratic destruction. "I've documented extensive violations," Karen began, spreading out a collection of photographs that looked like they'd been taken through binoculars, telephoto lens, and what appeared to be a drone's perspective. "Mr. Thompson is running an unauthorized business, compromising neighborhood safety, and violating multiple zoning regulations." Jake waited. Military intelligence had taught him the value of letting an opponent exhaust their ammunition before returning fire. When Karen finished her dramatic presentation, Jake stood. The room fell silent, partly out of respect, partly out of the controlled intensity he'd brought back from years of military service. "Let me be clear," he began, his voice calm but commanding. "Every single claim made tonight is false. I've been a resident here for 7 years. I've served multiple tours protecting this country. My pool is privately owned, fully permitted, and used exclusively for personal rehabilitation and occasional family visits. He methodically dismantled each of Karen's claims: permit documents, inspection reports, letters from his physical therapist confirming pool usage for recovery, medical records detailing his own rehabilitation from military injuries. Each piece of evidence was presented with a precision that left no room for argument. The association president, Tom Reynolds, a retired accountant who prided himself on fairness, began to look increasingly uncomfortable. Jake could see the tide turning. But Karen wasn't finished. He had strangers coming and going. She interrupted, her voice rising. Suspicious vehicles, late-night meetings. Jake's response was devastating in its simplicity. Those strangers are veterans I've helped transition back to civilian life. Those late-night meetings are support group sessions for combat veterans dealing with PTSD. The vehicles belong to fellow service members seeking help and community. A collective shift occurred in the room. Murmurs of respect, looks of shame directed at Karen. Tom Reynolds cleared his throat. Ms. Weitzman, do you have any substantive evidence of actual violations? Karen's triumphant expression crumbled. Her carefully constructed narrative was disintegrating in real time. I was just trying to protect the neighborhood, she stammered, but the room had already moved past her accusations. As the meeting concluded, several neighbors approached Jake. Some apologized. Others shared veteran support group information. Karen sat alone, her folder of evidence looking suddenly sad and insignificant. Outside, under the parking lot's harsh fluorescent lights, Jake realized this battle was about more than the pool. It was about community, understanding, and the right to live peacefully on one's own property. His phone buzzed. A text from his sister. Heard you crushed it at the meeting. Mom would be proud. Jake smiled, the first real smile in weeks. But he knew Karen wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The aftermath of the Homeowners Association meeting brought an unexpected calm, deceptive stillness that Jake knew all too well. In his years of military service, he learned that the quietest moments often preceded the most significant storms. Karen's next move came 3 weeks later, calculated and cold. Jake first noticed something was wrong when his property insurance company sent an unusual communication. A comprehensive review had been requested, not by Jake, but through official channels that suggested an external investigation. The timing was no coincidence. Forensic documentation experts would later confirm what Jake suspected. Karen had filed a detailed complaint with his insurance provider, alleging that his pool created a significant liability risk. She compiled a massive dossier claiming everything from improper fencing to potential structural hazards that could endanger neighborhood children. The insurance investigation was thorough. Inspectors arrived with clipboards and measuring tapes examining every inch of Jake's pool area. They interviewed neighbors, reviewed Jake's permits, and scrutinized every detail of the installation. What Karen didn't anticipate was Jake's meticulous preparation. Each inspector found not just compliance but excellence. The pool's fencing exceeded local safety standards. The surrounding area was immaculately maintained. Documentation was perfect, down to the last inspection report and maintenance record. But Karen wasn't finished. A local environmental agency suddenly became interested in Jake's property. Complaints about potential groundwater contamination, unauthorized landscaping modifications, and drainage issues began to pile up. Each complaint required Jake to respond, to provide documentation, to prove his innocence. Jake recognized the strategy immediately. Death by 1,000 bureaucratic cuts. His veteran support network became his lifeline. Fellow service members who understood systematic harassment began to help. They provided legal advice, documented support, character references. Some even showed up at his property, their presence a silent show of solidarity. The most painful moment came when Karen's tactics began to affect Jake's personal life. A potential job opportunity, a consulting position with a local security firm, suddenly evaporated. Jake couldn't prove direct connection, but the timing was suspicious. His physical therapist, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, became more than just a medical professional. She understood the toll this was taking, not just the bureaucratic stress, but the psychological warfare Karen was waging. This isn't about the pool, Elena told him during one rehabilitation session. This is about control, about someone who needs to feel powerful by destroying someone else's peace. Jake knew she was right. The dogs sensed his stress. Max would sit closer, a warm presence against his leg. Duke would patrol the property line, alert but controlled, a living security system born of training and loyalty. As autumn approached, Jake realized this was no longer just a neighborhood dispute. It had become a test of endurance, of character, the very principles he fought to protect during his military service. Karen had turned his sanctuary into a battleground, and Jake Thompson was not about to surrender his ground. His phone rang, an unknown number, Another potential challenge in what had become an increasingly complex war of attrition.